Is there anybody out there?
The lights in the night sky. Skywatchers. We're watching. We're watching.
Did you see that?
Skywatcher
on Skywatcher Radio. Skywatcherradio.com.
Hello, this is your host, Debra Jayne East, and we're broadcasting from Pilot Mountain, North Carolina in the Skywatcher studios. And I've had lots of guests on my show, and I don't think I've ever had anybody as interesting as the guest that I'm going to have on tonight. And I'm going to read you a little bit about his bio, and then we're going to get right on to the interview. And his name is James Bartley. I know you've been seeing that on Facebook for the last few days because I've been really excited. So I'm going to read you a little bit about his bio, and we'll get on with the show. James Bartley, the Reptilian Overlordship, Reptilian Abductions, and Military Abductions. James Bartley has investigated alien abductions, military abductions, and reptilian abductions for over 20 years. James is a protege of legendary alien abduction researcher Barbara Bartley. James is an independent historian with an emphasis on intelligence, counterintelligence, and special operations. He is a student of military history from antiquity to modern times. He has made an in-depth study of the military-industrial financial security complex which developed after World War II. James has hosted his own radio and internet webcast program based out of Tucson, Arizona, and interviewed a number of well-known individuals in the UFO field, including Georgina Bruni and former MUFON International Director John Schlesler. James formerly worked as an intelligence-related activity for United States Naval Air Forces. James has lectured at a number of locations, including the legendary UFO Friendship Campouts at the Little Alien in Rachel, Nevada, adjacent to the infamous Grim Lake Dreamland Complex, which I did not go and see when I was there, and I really regret that now. He gave a memorial speech and video presentation on behalf of his friend Dr. Carla Turner at a UFO conference in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1997. James was also a featured speaker at one of the Roswell conferences at Roswell, New Mexico in July 2007, which commemorated the 60th anniversary of the famous Roswell crash retrievals. James has also lectured in San Diego, California, Las Vegas, Nevada, Memphis, Tennessee, and Mississippi, to name just a few. James has lived for many years in an area rife with UFO and deep black military activity, the southwestern desert of America, in particular Southern California. James personally investigated numerous reptilian abduction cases and military abduction cases in the high desert of Southern California. Welcome, James. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fine, Deborah. Thank you so much for having me on here.
Well, I would like to begin the show with you telling a little bit about your own abductions because they started when you were very young. Could you tell us a little bit about that before we get into the reptilians and your new documentary that's coming up this year, which is called Don't Mention the Reptilians? So I'm looking forward to hearing about that.
Thank you, Deborah. I will just be one of a number of people excuse me, who have been interviewed for that documentary called Don't Mention the Reptilians. A number of other abductees will be featured, a number of researchers, including David Icke, Michael Tellinger, Bill Ryan from Project Avalon. They will be also on that documentary, so it's not just me. About my own experiences, I had an experience when I was about 4 or 5 years old in Texas. My dad at the time was stationed either at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi or Naval Air Facility, it's now called Kingsville, and we lived right there in the Corpus Christi area, and my dad had been stationed at both bases at one time or another, and I remember that it was sometime in the autumn because my mom was ironing my dad's Navy uniform. It was the black uniform, and enlisted men in the autumn and the winter wore the black uniform, and in the spring and the summer they typically wore the white uniform. So I remember my mom was ironing on an ironing board in the living room the black uniform. So it had to be sometime in the autumn or the winter, and it was around dusk, and I was in my room alone, and I remember this distinctly. That I could even remember seeing the dust motes hanging in the air that were illuminated from the sunlight, the waning sunlight coming in from the window. I was in there by myself, and next thing you know, I noticed a very small being that was levitating. It was brownish. It had kind of wrinkled skin, kind of a round head, round eyes, kind of wrinkled skin. And my first reaction to it was not one of fear, but like many children, I was kind of possessive and territorial. It was like, what are you doing here? This is my room. This is my stuff, right? And then I said, I'm going to tell my mom on you, right?
Oh,
and then the entity said, go ahead, she won't be able to see me. And it was floating. Now, if the researchers and the abductees out there have the book Alien Jigsaw Supplement by Katarina Wilson, I believe it was her second book, she has a drawing in there of what she calls a Type 2 gray. And that was very similar to the being that I'm describing now, except the being that I saw wasn't gray, it was brown. So I tore out of my room, and I went into the living room, and I grabbed my mom. I said, Mom, there's a little being. I didn't call him a being. There's a little man in my room. There's a little man in my room. And my mom was having none of it. She was saying, leave me alone. I have to, iron your dad's uniform. But I was persistent, and I kept saying, come with me, come with me. He's in there. I literally grabbed her by the elbow and pulled her into my room, and I let her in there, and I said, see? And, of course, there was nothing in there to be seen. The little being had disappeared, and then my mom got upset with me and stormed off and closed the door behind her. No sooner was she gone than the little being manifested again in my presence and gave me an expression as if to say, I told you so, right? And then it went on to tell me something, which I've since learned ETs have said to many other people, okay? So, for what it's worth, it told me that I had some kind of destiny to fulfill, that I had some kind of mission to perform, so on and so forth. And none of that was registering with me. All I wanted was for the entity to leave and get away from my toys and get away from my stuff, right? And if its intention sometime down the road was to make me feel special and inflate my ego, well, that wouldn't work, because countless other people are told the same things by ET, so how special can I be, right? So anyhow, the entity disappears, and for a period of about 2 years, I told anyone I could find about this story. And most people, adults and children, a lot of them took it with a grain of salt. They didn't try to disabuse me of this notion. Some of them believed me, and some of them kind of just, withheld their opinion. But what was interesting, and this is very common amongst abductees, is mysteriously, after having been the seminal event in my young life at that point, there came a point in time when I was around 6 or 7, 8 years old when I completely forgot all about it. Completely forgot all about it. I distinctly remember telling people about it when I was 2 years old, when I was in the second grade. So that would have been age between 6 and 8. So I told that story for 2 or 3 years at least thereafter. And then mysteriously forgot all about it. It was wiped from my conscious memory, and I would have forgotten about it had I not had a regression in the early 1990s, which I thought was a failure, quite frankly, because my friend who did the regression, it didn't seem to me that he got me really deep in a hypnotic trance. But what it did do was it kind of jarred my subconscious memory. because a couple of days after that, what I thought was an unsuccessful hypnotic regression, I was reading the book by Dr. Kenneth Ring called Project Omega, UFOs, NDEs, which stands for near-death experiences, of course, UFOs, NDEs, and the mind at large, Project Omega. And I had gotten to the end of the book, and there was a questionnaire, like about a 22-question questionnaire to determine if someone had had alien encounters or not, right? And I remember going down this list, and then I read a question. As a young child, do you ever recall having little friends or invisible friends that no one else could see, right? Or words to that effect. And then immediately that whole experience, which I just described, living in Corpus Christi, Texas, my mom ironing my dad's uniform, little E.T. showing up in my bedroom, all of that came back to me in real time, and I remembered every little detail about it. So that's how I remember that experience. But up till that point in my journey of discovery, at some point I'd had so many experiences that I sat down and I wrote out a list of unusual events, let's say, mystical, psychic, metaphysical, whatever the case may be, and UFO-related events and UFO dreams, as I could, those that I could recall. Then what happened was I wrote them all down, and after several pages with one of those yellow-lined notepads, after several pages I realized, man, this has been in my life from the beginning. I am an abductee, and now it all makes sense because from an early age I had very vivid UFO dreams, I had missing time experiences. When I came back from Germany in 1990, in the autumn of 1990, I had a series of experiences, one of which featured a gray ET looking out of my TV set at me while I was laying there asleep, and it was zapping my brain with some kind of energy. In the other room, the other side of my house, my younger brother was looking at the same ET through his TV, but he was wide awake. And in order to test his reality, and this happened about 10:30 at night, I'd had a series of abduction experiences, and before I'd come back home from Germany, I'd already started sleeping with the lights on the last couple of weeks I was in Germany. And then when I got back to America, to California, I was still sleeping with the lights on, so something was already going on. So I'd fallen asleep with the lights on and the TV on. And in those days, if you remember, after a certain point of time, I fell asleep about 10:30 p.m., and then what happened was, remember in the old days, they'd have the national anthem, the color bars, and then it would turn into snow, right?
Yeah.
The younger kids probably wouldn't relate, but that's how it was.
Oh, yeah. I remember it all too well.
Yeah, our TV programming ended at a certain point in the wee hours of the dark. And so at some point, early in the morning, in my mind's eye, as I lay there sleeping, I saw a split screen of me laying there sleeping in a lighted bedroom and seeing this gray ET in a background of snow looking at me and zapping my mind with some kind of energy, zap, zap, zap. And also in a split-screen fashion, I saw my younger brother, who's also had ET experiences, in his room seeing the same gray looking out at his TV, and he was shocked, he was terrified. And in order to test his reality, wide awake, he punched his dresser with his fist. Wow. Bang. And to me, with my bed up against the wall, commonality, many abductees sleep with their beds against the wall. When he hit his dresser, it sounded to me as if he hit the wall right next to my bed. It jarred me awake. I sat up. I looked straight at the TV set, and there was just snow. But I know what I just seen. And the next morning, when I came across my younger brother, he looked like he'd seen a ghost, right? And then he related that whole experience that I just described from his perspective, and somehow he blamed me for the experience, right? That's a whole other story.
God, that had to be mind-boggling to hear him relate that back to you.
Yes. He's figured prominently in a number of my UFO experiences and UFO dreams also. Sometimes he and I would be in our home oddly bereft of furniture. This is a common feature of some of my abduction dreams, that I frequently dream of the home we lived in San Jose, California, that I grew up in. And there would be no furniture in there, and then UFOs are flying at low altitude right over the roof, right? And they're flying around out in the front yard, and it's just me and my younger brother wondering what we're going to do, right? So that was one experience that happened in the autumn of 1990, and another experience I had was a full-on abduction in waking consciousness, where I managed to go to sleep without the lights on, and I awoke with a start one morning, and I saw 3 what we now know are reptilian grays. These are not just the typical grays that people describe. These were like a reptilian hybrid variant of the grays. They had at close range what appeared to be like elephant-looking skin, grayish but with a blue tint to it. And they were kind of stocky, and they had the black eyepieces, but behind the black eyepieces were the familiar reptilian vertical pupils. And their hands were not really hands, but claws, 3 claws, chicken claws, as the late, great Dr. Carla Turner describes them. In her book, the first book, Into the Fringe, Carla...
A great book, by the way.
A great book, an absolute classic. Candy, as her friends called her, described her family friend Fred being hypnotically regressed by Barbara Bartley. And out of this regression came the story of Fred being abducted by these reptilian grays with the clawed hands, the same kind that I'd seen, except the ones he saw had a red uniform. The ones I saw had kind of a bluish vest with some kind of symbol on the upper left. And there was 3 of them in my room. Somehow they emitted, I guess, an ambient light source, because I could clearly make out their details in a darkened room. And the one closest to the bed, to the head of the bed where I'm laying, he says to me in the language of the vernacular, "You're just having a nightmare, go back to sleep," right? So I notice him. I notice one, down near the foot of the bed, and I notice another one near the door. So I pinch my eyes shut, and I turn my head towards the wall. Then after a while, I turn and look, and the ETs are still there. And I knew I was having a real experience. And then a little while later, they brought in what I could only describe as a hybrid female. It was nude, it was grayish, a hideous face with long black hair, mammaries, because it was nude. It mounted me, and it began to simulate intercourse. Now, from the neck down, I could feel no sensations. I was immobilized, paralyzed. I could only pinch my eyes shut and move my head to the left or to the right. I could move it to the left, facing the wall, or I could move it to the right, facing the ET by my pillow, by the head of the bed, or I could look straight up at this hideous female being that was simulating intercourse. And I don't know if it actually had intercourse with me, because like I said, I couldn't feel any sensations below the neck. As far as I knew, I still had the bed covers over me, etc., etc. I pinched my eyes shut because I was terrified. And then
I would too.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And after a while, I would open my eyes, and the entity, female entity, was still there doing its thing, and the 3 reptilian grays were still standing around. So this went on for a while. And then mercifully, after some time had passed, I found myself in a long curving corridor with the reptilian gray on either side of me and a reptilian gray in front leading me along. My head was tilted downwards. Something was done to my eyes, which seems to happen in a number of my experiences, where the radius of vision is radically reduced. So I could only see within several foot radius. And my head was tilted downwards, so I just could see out of the periphery of my vision the two grays on either side of me, reptilian grays, and the reptilian gray in front, and they're leading me along. Whether they were dragging me along, whether I was walking, whether I was being levitated, I don't know. And then they eventually led me into a very long, wide room. I got the sensation of a lot of space upwards also, as far as a really high ceiling is concerned. And I was being led down a central aisle, and on either side, I can see in the periphery of my vision tables, and I could see people laying on them. Some people nude, some people partially dressed, et cetera, et cetera. And I just assumed there were other people like me, right? And then they led me to what I felt was the opposite side of the room, and it was quite a distance to the other side of the room. They laid me on a table, and then they started to do what I've since come to refer to as flexing exercises. Somehow, without even touching me, they made me involuntarily start doing like all these sit-ups, flip over on my tummy, and then bend my upper torso and my head way back, and then bend my lower half way back to the point where my heels and the back of my head were almost touching. And this went on for quite some time, and in the periphery of my vision I can see like a little tan being, and there was a taller kind of bluish-looking entity, a slim bluish-looking entity in the periphery of my vision, which some people refer to as the doctor, whatever the case may be. And in between grunts, because this was painful and it was, very arduous what they were putting me through, all these flexing exercises, in between grunts I asked this blue being, like, what are you doing, right? And then the telepathic message that came back was, and all the communication in this experience was telepathic. I can hear him as clearly as you. And then the blue being said, we're taking your energy. And I took that I took that with a grain of salt because I didn't know what it meant, right? Now, the next morning, that's all I really remember from that absolutely forgettable experience. Now, the next morning, I woke up, I was a basket case. And I promised a buddy of mine whose car was out of commission that I'd give him a lift to his job. So I parked on the street, and as fate would have it, and it's funny how the universe works, and you have to see the black humor in this sometimes. That particular neighborhood was slated for the mobile street cleaner that day. And so they sent a circular out to all the neighbors in that neighborhood to put their cars either on the driveway or in their garages and keep the curbs clear, right? So here I am parked on his street in front of his house, and there's not a car in sight, right? And this is just adding to my sense of isolation and fear and whatnot, And then I remember my friend getting in the car, and the first thing out of my mouth was, I had a horrible nightmare. And I just kept repeating that over and over. The long and the short of it was, that was the ultimate event during that time period. There was a missing time experience, which was, quite interesting too, where they took me in my car and parked me perfectly back in front of my house. And that's another kind of irony too, because I'm one of those sticklers. I have to be parked perfectly certain distance from the curb, whatnot, and here they go, they plop me right back in front of my house, perfectly parked, right? And but anyhow, the abduction with the three grays, the reptilian grays, that hybrid woman, et cetera, that started me on this quest, and I realized that I'd had UFO experiences and dreams all my life, and so I became a researcher. Eventually, I resettled to San Diego from the San Francisco Bay Area, and that was a turning point, because whereas in San Jose, California, I had no one to talk to about these experiences. It's funny, but a lot of my friends and relatives always thought of me as a somewhat credible guy, when it comes to talking about this, that, or the other subject. For years, they said, well, James always got something interesting to talk about. But suddenly, when I start talking about this stuff, right, suddenly I lose all credibility.
They probably raised their eyebrows, didn't they?
Yeah, it did. And so when I moved to San Diego, that was a turning point, because I joined the San Diego UFO Society, and I became a member. And our group there did hardcore, cutting-edge research. into: reptilian abductions, Milabs, underground bases where joint ET military aerospace operations take place, so on and so forth. And then during that process, I saw Dr. Carla Turner give a lecture at the International UFO Congress in Las Vegas in 1993, became her friend, and then I was instrumental bringing Dr. Carla Turner to California for her last series of lectures before she passed away from liver cancer. So all that came about, and I began networking and working closely with a number of researchers in the San Diego area and throughout the country. So, and especially Barbara Bartley, who I became very close to. Sadly, after Candy got really sick and then Candy passed away, I was the one that gave her memorial speech in Philadelphia. So I had She
was very well respected, and it was very sad when she passed away. I remember. Well,
she activated, if you will, a lot of people. She really inspired a lot of people. Myself, Eve Lorgan, a number of other people were inspired by her and her example. She was one of a kind, and she was the first and foremost of Barbara Bartholik's proteges. I became one, and a number of other people have since then. And then, sadly, Barbara passed away, and her husband. So I was the beneficiary of great teaching, and I had great teachers in this life, and for that I'm always thankful. And so what I've strived to do is get information about the encounter experiences to those people who are having the encounters, and especially the hardcore information, which many people find triggering, because a lot of these abductees, or people call themselves contactees, whatever the case may be, some of them have been programmed to react violently sometimes, even when they hear hardcore information about reptilians, about military abductions, so on and so forth. They want to keep it at an all is pleasant, all is positive, everything is spiritual kind of level. And then when one brings up negative, hardcore experiences, which need to be brought up, we need to understand on a personal and on a macrocosmic level the depth and the scale of this problem. Otherwise, we'll never be able to throw off the yoke of this reptilian overlordship, right? And so my goal has always been to get the information to those people actually having the experiences and who won't flinch when it comes to the hardcore information. And I've found that more and more people want the hardcore abduction, reptilian, Milab type information.
Well, I find in talking with many of my friends who have the friendly, ET experiences, that it's not like that for everybody.
That's right.
And even one of my friends who recently wrote a book about her experiences, and they're actually going to make a movie about it, she spoke about, the grays and their message and everything, but she also told me that one time she looked out the window and a reptilian was standing under a tree looking at her, and that she felt fearful, but that he didn't, as far as she knew, he didn't bother her. But I think everybody should know all the stories, not just the good stuff, but they should hear the other, because, I want to know. I want to know what's out there, and there are so many people that are coming forth with experiences like yours. And, to be honest, I only heard about reptilians like a couple of years ago, and I thought, you've got to be kidding. Lizard-like, tall, smart, high IQ, and they're out there. I thought, man, that's horrible. I would hate to run into one of them, because, my boys raised, I had 2 teenage boys, and they raised every kind of horrible lizard you can imagine. And they had a monitor one time that stood up in its cage and looked at me. And so when I heard about reptilians, I thought, oh, my God, if they look anything like a monitor and they can stand up and walk, that would be freaky. But I've listened to many of your speeches about reptilians, and I tell you, I'm also a former sexual assault counselor, and they are some of the worst sexual violators the most vile type of things that I have ever heard about. And, you know, you just told yourself about your experience. Why do they do this kind of thing?
The sexual assaults on women and men and young children?
Yes.
It's their nature. And I'll be the first to say that there are good beings out there. They're very good, benevolent, spiritually orientated beings that oftentimes live in higher dimensions, higher frequencies, higher planes, but also on this plane as well. And I've had experiences with what I would consider to be positive beings, but they're not the ones that are causing the problems. The ones that are causing the problems are the negative beings. And I'll be the first to say that there probably are good reptilians and at least neutral or somewhat benign reptilians that aren't intrusive, that don't mess with people. There's one group, or it's actually made up of a number of groups that we refer to as messengers, because that's all these particular reptilians seem to do, is they show up and they give a cryptic message and then they leave. You know, they don't resonate a vibration of fear or spitefulness or anything like that. And I know of cases where reptilians try to help abductees vis-a-vis the negative reptilians that the abductee was having problems with, that a good reptilian broke away from the pack, so to speak, tried to help and was punished for it. So I know those things happen, but people need to understand the methodology of not just the reptilians, but all negative beings, because they leave humans in a traumatized state, and we are bioenergetic beings. Not only are we scarred physically and emotionally, psychologically, but energetically, because that block traumatic energy wrought from these repetitive lifetimes worth, in some people's cases, negative experiences, including sexual assault. They can lead people to become traumatized and develop issues within these people of lack of trust, and conversely, the inability to set proper psychological boundaries. So that leaves the door open for these negative reptilian-human hybrids, these domestic abuser males who are all over the place, to zoom right in on these women that have endured childhood sexual abuse of one form or another, grew up with argumentative, fighting, alcoholic parents. All that leaves an energetic residue upon that young girl in our example. And then if she doesn't work through these issues, if she hasn't properly healed, reintegrated, pushed out all that blocked traumatic energy, everywhere she goes, even well into adulthood, she's still resonating at that frequency, which will attract these abusers from far and wide. Moreover, these reptilian beings, they track people's bloodlines generationally, multi-generationally, and it's child's play for them to psychically guide one of their reptilian human male hybrids of the abuser variety into the life of a woman who's been abused. And so what you have, a lot of people, a lot of psychologists and a lot of counselors, they reckon that these abuser types quickly determine the mindset and the vulnerability of these previously abused women via things like body language, so on and so forth. Well, that's part of it. But there's a hive consciousness at work, and there's an energetic recognition at work, not only via the reptilian familiars working through this abusive male, but through the abusive male himself, who is a reptilian human hybrid and is plugged right into the reptilian hive consciousness. So he will know instantly that this woman has been abused. And sometimes he can even intuit and visualize what the woman has gone through in the past. For example, reptilians have the means to not only release blocked traumatic energy within a female who they are raping, but they can also engender not only the body memories of those previous assaults going back to childhood, but the real-time memories. They have a way of accessing the memory bank, the information field, the morphogenetic blueprint resonance, whatever one wants to call it, the blueprint resonance within the woman herself, and cause her, as the reptilian is raping that woman, to relive the past sexual abuse in real time. And then the entity can even assume the guise momentarily of one of her former abusers. Maybe it was an uncle or a stepfather or a sexually abusive father, because they're all plugged into this hive consciousness, you see.
So they have control of memories from the past?
Yes, they can. They can somehow plug into the memory banks of people. And they can be quite mocking. And it's not just the reptilians themselves, but the reptilian human hybrids, which I'll talk more later, time permitting, about the dynamics of how reptilian human hybrids are created by the reptilians and how they wind up being in all strata of society, oftentimes in very influential positions. A reptilian human hybrid who knows that he is basically descended from the reptilians, at least part of his DNA, and who has even had training from the reptilians where they will teach him how to astral travel, they will teach him how to work with his energy, so on and so forth. These reptilian human hybrids, some of them, have the ability to astral project. They are astral operators. Let's say that one of these reptilian human hybrids is on a internet forum about contact experiences, and then there's a woman on there. Suddenly she starts talking about reptilians. Well, that can tend to anger said reptilian human hybrid who's lurking on the forum. What he can do, and it's very easy because the internet is an electromagnetic conduit, it's very simple for him to willfully astrally project to her, whether she is in full waking consciousness or often as not when she is sleeping, astrally project into her astral dreamscape and rape her. And
God,
also,
that's amazing.
Yes, and also warn her about talking about reptilians. I've come across this meme lately where these people are popping up saying they are, quote, good reptilians from the Tau Ceti star system, right? And everyone that I've met is actually quite a vile, repulsive character, and some of them are gatekeepers. They infiltrate these abductee support groups, and they create divisions within them. They hector and badger the support group facilitator into talking only about pleasant things. Don't talk about reptilians. Don't talk about Milabs. You're scaring the people in your group. You're creating fear within them. Well, it's not up to any one person to regulate what these other people feel about any given subject. And so when they come along and try to be a nanny and police and regulate what should or shouldn't be talked about in these abductee support groups, well, then those people got to be evicted, or better yet, not invited in the first place. Because I would never host, bad pun not intended, an abductee support group again. I used to, but if I did, I would screen the people out. Those people that I call false positives that are likely to get triggered by hearing about negative experiences, I simply don't invite them. I may interact with them on an individual basis, but I won't put them in a group because they will form factions. They will create disharmony, acrimony, divisiveness. I've seen it a million times. And one thing people must remember, a lot of these people who claim only positive experiences, some of them have also endured negative experiences from negative beings. And some of them have been programmed to only remember or want to talk about positive experiences. I've known of cases where these types of people were hypnotically regressed, and the skilled hypnotic regressionist knows that there are different blocks, shunts set up. Like, for example, there's a first level of amnesia for the abductee himself or herself. Then there's a second level for the hypnotic regressionist, so that whatever comes out will once again be the generic medical experiences, et cetera, nothing really deep or meaningful, right? So a regressionist has to get past that second level of amnesic blocks that have been designed specifically to thwart the hypnotic regressionist. And once you get past that second level, that's when you get down to what really happened. And this one gal in particular who only wants to talk about positive stuff, what came out were a series of quite negative experiences, traumatic experiences. And she was basically a basket case for several days. And then what happened was that default setting kicked in, the thought loops kicked in, because a big part of archontic programming, and by archontic I mean any negative being that violates our sovereign personhood, be it greys, mantis beings, reptilians, military, whatever the case may be, they operate on obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD thought loops. They instill negative thought loops in us.
Interesting.
Yes, thought loops of hopelessness, despair, self-loathing, lack of faith in oneself, trust issues. And people think these are their own thoughts because they sound like their own thought voices, but they're not. Because I've known of cases of reptilian abductees who were basically turned into anorexics and bulimiacs by the reptilians. They were trying to prove to the reptilians that they had self-control and discipline and would literally starve themselves. And then the reptilians would mock at him and laugh at him, say, you're a weakling, you're going to eat sooner or later, right? Now, that happens to be a case of a gal who can see the reptilian entities, whether they're physical or in their ethereal interdimensional state. Think about all those young gals out there who can't see reptilians, who just have the OCD thought loop of you're fat, you're ugly, no one will ever like you, boys will shun you, and that's the OCD thought loop she gets in her head, right? And then she acts on it by eating and not eating and whatever, and then purging and whatever the case may be. Well, something like that happened to this gal who only remembered consciously positive experiences. After several days of being a basket case, this thought loop kicked in of only talking about metaphysical platitudes and talking about positive experiences, so on and so forth. Then she was back to being her normal positive person talking self. You see how that works? So a lot of these people that only report positive experiences, some of them have had negative experiences. And in my experience, people who are definitely in contact with benevolent beings, and there are Arcturans. I know that's upsetting to many serious researchers out there. There are Pleiadian beings of different types, and some of them are positive, but some of them do interact at some level with the reptilians. What happens is when the negative ETs know that a given person, an abductee, is also being interacted with by positive beings, that person, that abductee, will often be in a cosmic tug of war where they're being pulled at from both ends. It's like the positive beings will try to undo the damage of what some of the negative beings do and that kind of thing. So so again, it goes back to the importance of understanding the methodology. But while we're on the subject, and before I forget, let me just elaborate a bit more about the reptilian rapes. What the reptilians do is they've imbued their DNA. They've essentially corrupted the gene pool of given bloodlines, and they've made it so some of these people in these bloodlines have a preponderance of reptilian DNA, and it makes it that much easier for these reptilians in physical, or often as not in interdimensional, non-corporeal form, to interact with them. For too long, we've suffered from a tactical and strategic disadvantage because we sleep for like 2/3 of our lives, and because most people are not fully realized spiritual beings, we don't go into the dream time, if you will, the 2/3 of our life when we're asleep, where we go intentionally astral traveling, dimension hopping, seek answers in our dream state, which a lot of shamans, elders, medicine men, medicine women, so on and so forth do. we're not lucid dreamers, which makes it very easy for negative beings to conduct a lot of programming upon us in the astral dreamscape. And because they're so familiar with us, they know what our hot buttons are. Well, they know that we are put at ill at ease when we as cleanly humans find ourselves in astral dreamscape settings or environments which are dirty or filthy or feculent or whatever the case may be, or they may insert images of like big cockroaches scurrying along the walls and whatnot. Anything to put us at a state of unease within our own astral dreamscape. And remember, we're not aware that we're dreaming. To us, we're in the moment. We're not lucid. We're just in this kind of filthy environment, which is negatively energized, or paradoxically, we could find ourselves in a very negative type of filthy setting, but we feel a very strong sexual energy, a sexual vibe, because it's comprehensive. They manipulate our astral dreamscape by, in some cases, actually in their ethereal form, the reptilians will enter into our sleeping bodies and take over our dreamscape from within. And also they can amp up our sexual chakra, so on and so forth. What they do with the women is they make them compatible for sexual purposes. And a lot of these women are Rh negative, but not all of them. And they can assume guises. They can manifest as an ex-lover of the woman, an ex-partner, someone she's got a crush with in the same apartment complex, an entertainment figure that she may be attracted to, and I've heard them all: Tommy Lee Jones, Bruce Springsteen, Tom Cruise, Billy Bob Thornton. I mean, I've heard them all, even Michael Jackson. And so these entities will assume that guys. What happens is the woman senses their presence, the reptilian's presence, and then she's immediately immobilized. And the entity can choose to rape her invisibly, because they have the means to operate in our plane of existence, but beyond the visual spectrum. Although there are abductees out there, females, who can see into other planes and other dimensions and can see them anyway. What's interesting is they may be invisible in the visible spectrum, but they can still leave an impression of weight on a surface, like a mattress or a shag carpet or a sofa, whatever the case may be. So the woman, in our example, finds herself immobilized, and then she feels a pressure or weight on her chest. And say initially she may not see anything above her because the entity is invisible, but she'll start to feel like she's being penetrated. Now, let's say the woman has managed to free up one of her arms from the immobilization, and then she strives to cover her loins to prevent whatever invisible entity there is from penetrating her, right? But even though she's able to move her hand in front of her yoni, she cannot feel anything with her bare hand. However, she still feels the penetration vaginally, or in some cases rectally, or some cases even she can be penetrated vaginally and anally at the same time. I wouldn't even presume to know how that works, but it's been reported. So,
oh God, it sounds horrible anyhow.
Yeah. So what you have is a paradox where somehow this invisible entity is penetrating layers of bedding, comforters, blankets, layers of including layers of night dress, but somehow solidifying its member to the point where she can feel herself being penetrated. And she cannot even block it with her free hand. Okay, so they're masters of frequency and resonance. They're masters of frequency and resonance. They can densify their whole physical body and become corporeal in our plane of existence, or they can densify just a certain part of their body. Go ahead.
Is the reason for this just for sexual pleasure, or are they trying to impregnate women?
That happens too. I've spoken with women who recall, many abductee women describe the familiar extraction of gray human hybrid-looking fetuses, quite small and quite frail and sickly-looking. But what reptilian abductees describe, female abductees describe to me, is they recall sometimes, it seems to be a dream or a nightmare, or sometimes it's in full waking consciousness or slightly muted consciousness. She'll recall being visited by either doctors in wearing like doctors' smocks and doctors' face masks, so on and so forth, and then the baby being extracted from her, and it'll look to her to be a little scaly kind of cross between a human and a reptilian being, right? Other times they will remember quite clearly that it's reptilians that are doing the gynecological work and extracting the half human, half reptilian fetus. And sometimes they can look quite reptilian, more reptilian than human. So that does happen. And there's different ways they can be impregnated. They can be impregnated in the way that I've described by a sexual assault, or I've known of cases where reptilian human hybrids, these raptoids that I mentioned that have the ability to bilocate and astrally rape women, I've known of cases of them impregnating female abductees, and then the reptilians showing up later on and extracting that fetus from them, right? Or what will happen also is the woman will have a dream of being surrounded by doctors in a kind of an OB-GYN kind of setting, and she doesn't remember much more. Then she wakes up having all these hemorrhages, or she passes a lot of blood and tissue when she's using the toilet, okay? So those kinds of things happen too, cramping, lots of hemorrhaging, lots of bleeding, and then losing the fetus that way. Sometimes they'll find the fetus. Oh, look, but washed into my toilet bowl, right? And then they'll keep it for a while. And I've heard stories of gray fetuses and sometimes reptilian fetuses. But what often happens, often is not, within a day or two, that fetus will disappear, or that amniotic sac or whatever it may be. It'll just mysteriously disappear. What the reptilians also do when they rape these women is they instill all these obsessive compulsive behaviors, because when the human female, and actually hybrid female, of one or more ET races, the reptilian can engender full body orgasms within the women, from the tips of her toes to the top of her head, full body orgasms which leave them breathless and just kind of senseless, and which in some cases can last for 2 hours or more, okay? So we're talking about a powerful, energetic flow of energy, more like rushing up through her chakras, out through her crown chakra. And the entity absorbs all that. Now, if the entity wanted to instill the fright reaction, because then the woman will start to release certain hormones, adrenal hormones, and so on and so forth, because she's in fear, what the entity may do is allow her to see it in its full physical form, right? In its full scaly kind of appearance.
They are not attractive.
They're not, and there's different kinds. They're not all the same, and there's hybrid variants in between. And they can also, like I said, assume the guise of someone who had abused, raped, or molested her in her past, because they have a means of doing that. So when they want to engender the fear response, they will do that, and then she will start to resonate at a fearful, in a fearful state, and start to pump out all these hormones and whatnot, which are fear-induced, and the entity feeds off all that. Now, what the entity's very energy, its very vibratory negative energy field has a way of instilling paralysis and immobility in a woman or a man that they're messing with. Just their very energy can do that. And what happens is, because of the power of these orgasms, there's a number of byproducts and side effects that result. The woman can, for a time, become very psychic in the ensuing hours, days, or even weeks. Her psi abilities can be amped up. I know of cases where the reptilians and the military were working in cahoots in a particular underground base in the high desert of Southern California, in the Victorville, Barstow area. And it was an underground base. Me and my team at the time were investigating a lot. We'd spoken to a number of Milabs who'd been taken to this particular underground base by the military. And what happened in this one woman's case was that this reptilian had come from this underground base, raped this woman, and then departed. And no sooner had the reptilian departed than the military teleported her to their underground base and immediately set her to doing remote viewing operations in various parts of this planet, because they knew she was her chi, her psi abilities were amped up because she had just been raped by this reptilian being, and her kundalini was amped up. So for that amount of time, they fully exploited her remote viewing and astral abilities. Another byproduct of these reptilian rapes is a heightened libido. The women become very sexually oriented, where they're very their libidos are heightened. Sometimes they resort to self-gratification, i.e. masturbation, sometimes compulsively, and sometimes, and not passing judgment on any of them because they're acting out. Again, we're talking about the very real after effects, byproducts of these intrusions into people's lives. One of the byproducts is side effects is promiscuity, where the women will in relatively short period of time or over a protracted period of time will have sex with one person many times, or also multiple partners, because the entity is still working through the woman. The entity is extracting all that sexual chi between her and her partner. And
she may or may not have any idea what's really going on then.
No, she may not. She may have an idea that there's a connection between her behavior and the reptilians, especially if they've manifested in the visual spectrum and allowed her to see them. But if a lot of times, a lot of these attacks also happen in the dream state, where the woman will just be walking along in astral dreamscape, and then within the dream, she will feel extreme weariness, extreme sleepiness, right? And then suddenly, like a full bed will just manifest, whether it's in a forest or whether it's in some other astral dreamscape setting. And then the woman will lie down and go to sleep, and then no sooner within the astral dreamscape is she sleeping and her consciousness is muted, that the reptilian begins the rape that goes on, right? So a lot of these women that are having these things, they know they have dreams that seem to feature a lot of sex, and they may not have made the connection that these are like what they would have called incubus in olden times, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It wouldn't occur to them that they would have these experiences that are being raped. Now, again, there are other byproducts. For example, yeast infections, very common amongst women who have reptilian rape experiences. Candidiasis, yeast infections, sometimes vaginal and or anal rectal bleeding, sometimes quite profusely, because the member of these reptilians is quite large, and so they're really damaged sometimes inwardly, and so also the obsessive compulsive disorder aspect to it, where these neural pathways have been created, because when the kundalini is forcefully, with no regard to the person, when the Kundalini rising is forcefully pushed from the basal chakra all the way to the crown chakra, it creates all this energetic imbalance. That's why you always hear stories of the scarlet women that Aleister Crowley would use in his sexual tantric rituals, right? How so many of them wound up going crazy, committing suicide, so on and so forth, because Crowley wasn't too interested. Crowley himself, being a reptilian-human hybrid adept, wasn't too interested in any malign after effects that the scarlet women would have to suffer through. That was just their problem, right? It wasn't. He could care less. So something along those lines happens to these women when they are subjected repetitively to these reptilian rapes, and because the OCD thought loops kick in, where they're preoccupied with sex. Sometimes they're given as a compulsive self-gratification, promiscuity, whatever the case may be. The reptilian can then start to fine-tune the programming, right? He could do things to a woman where some reptilian males are very possessive. They don't want what they consider their mates, their human female mates, to have any other partners. So conversely, what it could do is manipulate the woman's olfactory senses, her sense of smell, so that human male pheromones are repulsive to her, right? So every time she comes across a male anywhere, she's just repelled and disgusted by them, wants nothing to do with them. This way the reptilian gets to kind of hog her all for himself, right? And sometimes the woman, through, again, no shame, no judgment being passed, some of the women may be aware of these reptilians doing these things to her. And so what happens is, say a few days have gone by without a visit from the reptilian and her libido is all cranked up, she may secretly to herself start wanting or kind of longing for the guide or the entity to come back and do it to her again, just so she can have that powerful Kundalini experience again, right? And to the point where she actually, is kind of missing the guy. And then she goes through these other OCD thought loops. And remember, these are not just OCD thought loops. These are thought loops that are negatively emotionally laden. And negative emotions and thoughts that go along with it tend to lower our vibrations. They tend to lower us and stress us out inwardly, internally, and mess with our mental and emotional equilibrium, and so on and so forth. So now she's going through this cycle of guilt and shame of wanting the thing to come back, right? So you see how it could work on many different levels.
Yeah, it's like catch-22. I mean, it's awful, but yet because of all of these different issues are sort of programmed into her, and she develops a craving, it's like, damned if I do, damned if I don't. But what are ways, is there any way a woman could prevent a sexual assault from happening if she's aware of it and she doesn't like it? Or, I mean,
yes,
what can she do to protect herself?
There's some things that she can do on a natural, holistic level. I would really, I would encourage people to get into the green superfoods, barley grass mix, and chlorella, so on and so forth. Also, frequencies. This is a frequency war. And there are certain frequencies on YouTube, like the 528 Heart Center Love Vibe, the 528 hertz. What I like to do is I like to, on one tab, listen to this one particular 528 hertz frequency video, and on the other tab, I like to listen to underwater whale sounds, for example, when I do my meditations and energizations, because it helps to ground me. I have a Rife machine, so I like to run the 528 hertz vibe frequency on my Rife machine. I like to run the 40 hertz centering grounding frequency. Also, tensor rings. I can't say enough about tensor rings. They don't work forever.
I don't know what that is. What exactly is that?
Well, a tensor ring, it's ancient Atlantean technology and probably goes way back out into the cosmos, the Sirius and other places where humans came from. It's based on the sacred cubit measurement of 20.6 inches. You take a certain gauge thickness of copper, and you, from one end to the other, you create a right-handed corkscrew from one end to the other of this 20.6 inch length of copper. And then you loop it, after you've created that corkscrew from one end to the other, you loop it to form a ring or a hoop, and then you solder it or tape it together. Ideally, you solder it together. And what that does, by turning it into a ring with the twisting corkscrew all the way through it, it negates the positive and negative polarities, and in its place, it generates 144 megahertz torsion field, tensor field, right? Kind of a torsion field. And there's different frequencies. They've recovered a number of frequencies. The so-called lost qubit of 177 megahertz, and these other frequencies. And they come in rings, they come in coils, they come in spheres, which is really just 3 or more rings put together. And these create energy fields. Like I'm wearing a pendant that's actually a tensor coil around my neck, and I have tensor rings. And what these do is they provide a degree of protection. Now, they don't work for everybody, but I would say that out of 15 Milabs, Milabs are legitimate alien abductees who also have military, aerospace, deep black medical experiences. I would say out of 15 or so Milabs who are going through hardcore reptilian, alien abduction, targeted individual, Milab kind of stuff, out of 15 of them, only 2 or 3 reported having no benefit from these rings. And of the ones who stated they had benefit from them, they reported almost immediate benefit, almost immediate relief, and they reported that their experiences have either diminished in frequency and intensity to a large degree, or they've stopped altogether, right? Because if someone's having these experiences, if you sleep with a tensor ring beneath your bed, I wouldn't put it under the pillow because it'd keep you awake all night. I mean, it just amps out too much. But if you put it under your bed or next to your bed, it will provide protection. And what I do also is I have an orgone generator, not just a so-called inert piece of orgone, but the kind you actually plug in to an electrical outlet. If I were to unplug my unit, my house would immediately be saturated by unwanted, unhealthy electromagnetic pollution. I would feel it instantly. But by plugging this in and leaving it on all the time, I don't deal with electromagnetic pollution and like electromagnetic emissions from underground water sources, whatever the case may be. These orgone generators also go some way towards lessening the frequency and intensity of alien or interdimensional intrusions. So I would recommend women do that, and males who are having these problems, because the reptilians will also sodomize males and young boys also. And we don't have enough time to talk about it today, but sometime maybe I can talk about the hybrid agenda, because the fundamental building block of the reptilian overlordship is the corruption of the human gene pool in a way that advances their agenda. They've essentially imbued their onerous characteristics of aggressiveness, sexual aggressiveness, territoriality, acquisitiveness, etc., into us, and some people more than others, and maneuvered these reptilian human or Draco human hybrids in the positions at all strata of society, to the point where our whole civilization has become a miasma of rage, of negative emotions, of fear, of anguish, of hopelessness, and they feed off all of this. It's a frequency war.
Oh, that is the truth. You're right about that.
War. So even at the domestic level, just think of all the domestic abuse going on. Think of all the disharmony going on and anxiety wrought by finances or the lack thereof in this controlled matrix we're in. Because what's really happening also is that other planes and other dimensions, we often hear, those of us in this field, about energetic cords that are attached to abductees or people in general, that archontic beings of one stripe or another place on people. And these are usually energetic, ethereal, interdimensional kind of cords. And they extract energy out of us. And they also knock off chunks of our soul fragments, and they feed off that at our expense as well. We are an energy source. We're a food source for them. And in a macrocosmic sense, what a lot of these negative archontic beings do in their own home dimensions or home planes is they have these machines, and they're like organic machines, some of them. And some of them look like metallic machines. And they have all these hoses and tentacle-looking thingies that they plug into our reality. And they just siphon off all this negative energy, which people do on a constant basis because of the OCD negative thought loops that they've become accustomed to. And then it's exacerbated by the entertainment propaganda news system, just constantly pumping out movies, fear-based movies, negative themes, end-of-world scenarios, so on and so forth, predictive programming, a lot of it. And it's just all to embed into the conscious and subconscious minds of the viewership this negative vibe, OCD thought loop, which, again, unwittingly, we just pump out all this negativity in the form of energy, negative frequencies out into the ether, and it's all absorbed at our expense. This can happen in a microcosmic sense where an abusive male reptilian human hybrid is feeding off the fear and anxiety of the woman he's psychologically or physically abusing. See, the entity's working through that domestic abuser, because most of these guys are hosts anyway. A host is a hybrid host who they're genetically, spiritually, neurologically predisposed to being taken up as a host by one or more of these entities. And eventually an interface, as I call it, takes place where the entity comfortably merges with the physical person and essentially takes the person over and works through that person. And that's why so many of these hybrid abusers, they seem to be psychics, they seem to be mind readers, and a lot of guru types too. A lot of these gurus in a lot of these spiritual groups are really these hybrids of one stripe or another. So they will work through these hybrid abusers and not only feed off the rage being generated by the hybrid host, they will simultaneously feed off the consternation, the fear, the anxiety, the paranoia of the person that's being abused. It's a big smorgasbord of negative energy that's feeding them. And so that's why I always say it's a frequency war. And so, the YouTube videos of the 528 hertz love vibe, the always trying to maintain a harmonious inner vibe, maintain our inner equilibrium no matter what's going on around us. I can only take surface level negative news, up to a certain point. Like a lot of these alternative news sites, I only read the headlines. I'm familiar enough with the outward manifestations of the reptilian overlordship, i.e. the New World Order, the Illuminati, Agenda 21, et cetera, et cetera. I'm familiar enough with that I just need to read headlines. I don't need to immerse myself in all these stories, and because I get into a state of righteous indignation. I get really irked and really pissed off, and that lowers my vibe, you know what I mean? And they start to, feed off me. So we always...
And, you're not the first one that said that. I've interviewed other people, and they have told me that exact same thing. But I want to ask you, how could a person tell or not if their DNA contains any DNA of greys, reptilians, or mantids. If they're continually creating hybrids and to sort of infiltrate the Earth, how could you tell? Is there any way that you could tell if you were part reptilian?
I would say that the majority of people on the surface who've come into the world the normal way, i.e. through childbirth, have some degree of reptilian DNA. I don't see how they can avoid or not have it because of the long-term genetic manipulation of the human race, which I believe really began in earnest at the tail end of the most recent spate of celestially driven cataclysms about 12,500 years ago. The survivors came out of their caves. There were far less people on the surface for the reptilians and other negative beings to genetically manipulate. And so they corrupted the gene pool. They got rid of the mother goddess worship, the divine feminine. That was all kicked to the curb. They imposed patriarchy. They imposed alphabet symbol language and got rid of alphabet language, letter language, and got rid of symbol language. Symbols speak to us on a soul level, over soul level, whereas alphabet letters shunt us into the left brain where they can create like all kinds of laws and all kinds of bogus science, and then they created priesthoods to enforce all these laws and so on and so forth, and then here we are today, right? So they really began this genetic manipulation in earnest after the most recent spate of celestially driven cataclysms. And the military, I'm sure by now, deep black elements of the military have for a long time been able to determine who within their ranks are abductees and who have ET DNA. And because we our star elders, our star family, come from so many different places, Sirius, the Pleiades, even Alpha Draconis, Orion, so on and so forth, we have the DNA of multiple ET civilizations, not just one. And for example, we talked about the Rh negative. That's a blatant way of determining if someone has got reptilian DNA is if they are Rh negative. And what Rh stands for is rhesus, because of the old concept of we having evolved from primates, right? Well, if someone is Rh negative, that means, according to these tests, this individual has no trace of any simian or primate DNA. So that begs the question, well, what filled the void? Where are they from? What did they descend from, So that's one example of how we can determine if someone has got reptilian DNA. But, to some degree or another, we all have reptilian DNA. And I don't want to start a witch hunt where anyone, can accuse someone else and say, oh, this person has got too much reptilian DNA, let's surround them with torches, I don't want that to happen. It's the soul quality within. It's not so much the person's DNA. It's their soul quality, how heart-centered they are, right? All those corny kind of things, they're real. This is a frequency war.
Well, I have a question from an abductee, and I think it's a pretty important question, and I'm sure that it would be very helpful to them. And their question is, they want to know, is there any way for a Milab to tell if they're being used by the military as a covert op or sleeper? And if so, what could they do about it?
There's a number of different ways. It helps to be able to remember the dreams because, like the ETs, the military can access us astrally. They can also astrally abduct us and put us in virtual environments where a lot of the training takes place. The military, and I'm really cutting to the chase here. In another show, I'll go into more detail about why. But
I'm going to ask you back because this has been so fascinating. I hope you can come back in a few weeks, and we'll do the second part because I am learning so much. But what were you saying now?
A lot of it happens in not only in our physical body, in our astral bodies, and also in other planes of existence, because some of the more high-tech Milab control groups have already carved out niches for themselves in higher or other planes of existence, other dimensions, if you will. So, and time doesn't pass in these places the same way it does here. For example, they can take a Milab and train them for hours and days, and even have them live for what seem like weeks in these other planes or other dimensions, which are military installations, military facilities, and then send them back, and virtually no time has passed in our time stream. So it's a mixed bag. But if one is always having dreams of escape and evasion type dreams, where they're like they're tasked with going from one side of a war-torn city to another, and they feel like they're being pursued, kind of a hounds and hares kind of thing, where escape and evasion, where they sometimes can even see their pursuers chasing after them through a war-torn city, or if they have dreams or memories of being trained to forage and survive in an NBC environment, nuclear, biological, chemical. Because Milabs are trained by the various Milab group controllers to survive a variety of probabilities here on the surface, whether it's nuclear missile attacks, fireballs coming from the sky, mass civil unrest, earthquakes, tsunamis, whatever the case may be. They're trained to survive that. And one of the training themes is very common, where amongst themselves the Milabs are expected to like break down like responsibilities. Okay, you go off and you find drinkable clean water. You go off and you bring back firewood. You go off and you find us non-contaminated food. In what is usually in these training scenarios a very polluted environment, polluted for one reason or another. And what must be noted also is, and I don't know if how this jives with other people's belief systems, but reincarnation plays a role in it too, where some people have past life memories of being shamans or high priests, priestesses, healers, warriors of this, that, or the other variety. And some of them even have past lives of being an ET and having memories of being involved in cosmic wars, being involved in wars in the Orion constellation, having memories of seeing their home planet or one of their home planets being blown up, right? And what happens is these people incarnate into the current time stream, and within the morphogenetic blueprint resonance of their DNA, they still have the innate metaphysical abilities of this, that, or the other ET life, as well as their abilities from their past shamanic lives, high priest lives, medicine man, medicine woman lives, right? And the ancient stellar wisdom that goes with it. It seems that the good and the negative ETs, as well as the Milab military controllers, have a way of accessing and exploiting those latent metaphysical abilities within these Milabs. Because these Milabs are not only utilized in physical ops in our three-dimensional world, either underground, on the surface, on naval vessels, whatever the case may be, they're also utilized off-world in this cosmos. But they're also utilized in higher planes and higher dimensions. They're used interdimensionally as well. So somehow these military controllers and the ETs of both polarities know how to reaccess and activate these abilities within Milabs. So it's part of what needs to be done. The Milabs have to learn how to access their abilities on their own in a healthy, safe way, right? And then they'll really be able to turn the tables on this whole mess, because then they'll be able to protect themselves better. They'll be able to go on reconnaissance missions and learn about things on their own. So other things to look for is frequently finding yourself in dreams or in memories of being in military installations on the surface or below the surface, what seem to be the interior of huge hangars, being on runways with military craft, finding yourself on naval vessels, the interior of what seem to be naval vessels, but sometimes they use screens and you're really on a spaceship or some other place, but they make you think you're in a naval vessel, or inside of a submarine, or what seems to be a big passenger liner, a cruise ship liner, ocean liner, and also classroom dreams, like frequent dreams where you're in a class setting and there's an instructor there and they're teaching you about advanced physics and ET civilizations, so on and so forth. And also there's something called astral detention, where one keeps finding themselves in an astral setting, and after a while they're conscious of this, and they can't get out of it. Whether it could be a place simulated to look like a nightclub with phony palm trees, a stage for an entertainer, dinner tables, but you're just stuck in this nightclub and you can't get out. Try as you might. You try the doors, there's no windows, you can't get out. And then every once in a while, maybe the security guard-looking guys come in and they start messing with you, harassing you, fighting against you. And you have to fight them back because they like certain Milabs, especially male Milabs, at times to be in a heightened state of high anxiety, of frustration, of rage, and because part of the Milab programming involves electromagnetic beaming of the impulse control center, the frontal lobe, while the person is asleep. So if a person is having dreams and they feel like their head's being beamed, or their groin is being beamed, their solar plexus is being beamed, sometimes all at the same time, right? Because sometimes when one is being beamed, inadvertently their third eye is activated, and they, even though their eyelids are closed, they can see the energy beams coming down through the ceiling and zapping them in the solar plexus, the frontal lobe, whatever the case may be. Oftentimes, a part of their brain that deals with sleepiness will be triggered and beamed, which will create this sensation of extremely heavy eyelids, like your eyelids weigh 10 tons each, and you have to keep them closed. You just feel really sleepy, and as long as your eyelids are closed, this movie runs in the mind of the sleeping, electromagnetically beamed male Milab, in our example. And in this movie that's running in their mind, there could be hordes of people attacking them, crowds of people rushing forward, attacking them, and also the controllers can make it so the person being beamed like this in their sleep, they feel the very real physical sensation of being slapped about the face, battered about the head, slapped in the temple, slapped in the face. So there's a comprehensive parallel thing going on, where in the theater of the mind, they're being attacked, jostled. They can feel people grabbing at them, which is mimicked in their physical being. They can feel the sensation of being grabbed and being jostled while people are grabbing them and kicking them in this scenario that's playing out in their mind. They're being beamed to keep them from waking up. The moment they pry their eyelids open, the whole dream stops, right? But then they're being beamed in a part of their brain which engenders extreme sleepiness, so they're compelled to close their eyelids again, and they're back in the scenario where they're being chased and being attacked. So there's a variety of things someone can experience, both in waking consciousness and in the dream state, that will suggest that they're having Milab experiences. Another one is waking up with raised injection marks, kind of like booster shots in a pattern on your forearm, on your bicep, and these are raised. They're not just like puncture wounds. They're like lighter in tone to the surrounding skin, and they're raised. They're like convex bumps that are arranged in some kind of a geometric pattern. Some types of colored marks on your body can also be indicative of military involvement, like lime green kind of blotches or oval marks on your body, lime green oval marks, or conversely like aquamarine kind of looking blotches. Some of them could be quite large in different parts of your body. Weird settings that one finds himself in. For example, just sitting on a toilet, and then people on either side of you are sitting on toilets. There's no There's no separator, no stalls separating the people. They're just sitting there, and they're wondering, gee, I'm just sitting here. I'm embarrassed. There's no toilet paper. I don't even feel like I've got to go, right?
Gosh.
And a lot of these are big kind of unisex bathrooms where women will be in an all-woman's bathroom, and then suddenly a guy will stroll in there, do, but he'll be a male Milab. He'll look around, and there'll be all females in there, and he'll be shocked, and he'll turn around, walk out. And sometimes connected to these bathroom settings are like a locker room setting, that where it appears to be like rows of lockers with combination locks on them, that kind of thing. Also settings where there's underground, like indoor swimming pools, like the old doughboys that only come up to your waist, right? And overhead you'll see like catwalks and rafters, and I mean it varies depending on the underground base or above ground installation you're taken to. And some of the people that have these Milab experiences, some of them tend to live near surface level military bases in the American Southwest. It's really extreme. Places like China Lake Naval Weapons Center, you have Edwards Air Force Base, and then you have all the underground and above ground aerospace corporations there in the Antelope Valley in Palmdale and Lancaster, which is quite close to Edwards Air Force Base too. And so a lot of Milabs in those areas are taken taken to those underground bases. So it really runs a gamut. I might have to do a whole show on just Milabs, you know what I mean?
I would love that, because I have had countless people confide in me and tell me these things, and they don't have anywhere to go to. They're afraid. They're afraid of who they're going to talk to and ask.
I can understand.
I definitely understand.
And they can contact me too. I'd be happy to talk to them. There's other dreams, like dreams of endless running, either with other adults wearing jogger outfits, like the familiar gray long sleeve sweatshirts and the matching sweatpants. Sometimes you see military trainers running alongside or standing around. There's weapons training of various types. Sometimes you'll see children, younger kids in these training scenarios, right, where they're running too, running in forests, running along running along a beach, running along through a forest adjacent to a beach. It just varies, and also seeing yourself at times in military settings, in military conferences, in a headquarters, in an office where people are wearing military uniforms. And sometimes a Milab will find himself or herself in a military uniform. So it varies, but you live in a place that's rife with Milab military activity there in North Carolina. So.
Oh, yes. Yes, I belong to many groups down here, and there are so many sightings, so much going on right now. It's really surprising. It seems like back in the 90s, around where I live, there were lots of UFO sightings, different things like that. And there was a lull for a while, but they have picked up again, especially along the coast at Myrtle Beach. Lots of sightings and different things going on down there.
In all likelihood, there's underground and undersea ET bases and joint military ET bases around that whole area. So, you know, my heart goes out to the people that are having to go through all this. They just have to. They also have to watch about being suggestible. They may go through a phase where they just can't say no to anybody, always being upsold by telemarketers or people at car washes to get the next highest level of car wash treatment. They suddenly lose the ability to say no. They lose their will and volition. When they're in a state of a high suggestibility, they have to be mindful of that and not put themselves in situations that could cause problems for them. They also have to be wary of people coming into their lives that are negatively energized and may be mind controlled and may be a host for some other entity too. Because a lot of times Milabs will have to deal with people sent into their lives for very specific purposes. So it runs the gamut.
Well, I think in listening to you talk about the military and about Milabs and everything, I think it would be a good idea, and I actually tell people this if they talk to me about it, that if you're having dreams, it's good to write them down.
Yes.
Because after a few days or a week or so, you're going to forget key details. And also pay attention to your body.
Yes.
Like you said, look for marks and take a picture of them.
Yes, and sometimes, just to interject really quickly, hold that thought, sometimes Milabs wake up feeling as if they run a marathon, like their legs and their thighs are really stiff. They feel like they've run a marathon and then been run over by a truck. So if that happens to people who may be Milabs, chances are you're being accessed and they're using you at night.
Well, I know someone, this is sort of unusual, and I'll tell you about it to see if you've ever heard of it. Someone once said that they were having a dream about some kind of strange entity, and they knew they were dreaming, but then when they opened their eyes up and they looked beside of their bed, there it was beside their bed in real life.
Yeah.
So those type of things are just, you don't hear about it in any books, it's not made up.
Yeah,
these are things that really happened.
That's right. What they've done, a lot of the big name abduction researchers, is they've reduced it to the empirical reductionist kind of mindset of everything can be explained within the context of alien-human genetic hybrid program. You have the medical experience, so on and so forth. But what you just described is a classic example of how these beings can interact with us simultaneously in the physical and astral dreamscape level, where the person is asleep in the astral dreamscape. They're aware they're having a dream, and they can see a particular entity. And yet when they manage to pry their eyes open, that very same entity is standing by their bed. It's interacting with them at multiple levels, not just one level. And that's the problem we have when we allow all these non-abductees to set the parameters and decide what's credible and what's non-credible in the alien encounter experience. Because we are multidimensional beings, and so we experience this on a multidimensional level. It's not just simple medical experiences and being taken up in the ship. So a lot of the abductions happen right in our own bedrooms. And a lot of these beings don't even need craft to get around in. They just simply open portals up right in your bedroom or somewhere in your house and come out, or they pull you through it.
Yeah, they don't have to sneak in the window, do they?
No, they don't. They don't. So yeah, I would love to do a whole nother show on Milabs, and I'll write out a whole outline of stuff, points that I'll make.
I would love that. I tell you what, I have learned more tonight than I have learned at any other time in my life when I researched reptilians, and it is fascinating and also shocking at some of the information that I've learned, but I would rather know than not know.
Yes.
And James, I just want to thank you. You have given me a wealth of information, and I'm going to be doing some more research because I do want to have you on the show again. I just thank you so much.
Oh, I'd love
to. Do you have any last words to say before we sign off?
Yes. It's a frequency war. Always, no matter what's going on around us, try as much as possible. I know it's difficult to maintain one's inner harmony, inner equilibrium. Get out in nature when you can. Ground yourself when you can. Surround yourself with positive people, and do things to keep yourself grounded, but also develop one's metaphysical and psychic abilities. Because in the old days, the negative archontic beings always held the high ground, tactically, strategically speaking. But now, because of the increased Schumann resonance, because of all the energy, intensified cosmic energy, gamma energy streaming in from the galactic core, that is activating, for lack of a better term, ascension codes within the morphogenetic blueprint resonance of many people, Milabs especially. So we're living in an exciting time. Ride that frequency wave and go into your past lives, go into your memories, write down your dreams, and do what you can to safely activate your own abilities, because each one of you can and will make a difference. And I really want to send my encouragement to all of you out there going through these experiences.
Hey, yes, and we hold the key. We hold the key. We've
Yes,
got
we
to have
do.
the desire to find an answer to this, and it's within ourselves. So I hope that everybody that is listening tonight will do some of these things. And if you have any questions, how can they get in touch with you, James?
My website is theuniversalseduction.com/Bartley. Theuniversalseduction, one word, .com/Bartley. And if you just do a Google search of The Universal Seduction space +sign space James Bartley, it'll come right up. So then you'll be able to find my email on there and send me an email. Or if you know, a lot of these people, you know who the really legitimate ones are, the ones that are really having the hardcore experiences. If they ask you for, my email, you feel free to give them my email. That would be fine.
That would be great. When is your documentary going to come out? Don't mention the reptilians. When can people look for that to come out right quick?
I've been told it's going to come out sometime in November, maybe in December. And like I said, I'm one of a number of people on there. If you type in the YouTube search query, "Don't mention the reptilians," it'll pull up a number of short clips from a number of other abductees and researchers. So you'll see mine, but you'll see a number of other people's as well. So I think it's long overdue, and I'm really glad that someone is looking into the subject very seriously. So it's long overdue, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Thank you so much, James Bartley, for being my guest tonight. And we will schedule another show. And I want to thank all the listeners out there. This is Debra Jayne East for SkywatcherRadio.com. Have a good night.
You've been listening to Skywatcher Radio Show.
Is there anybody out there?
If you'd like to be a guest on the show, contact us through our website, skywatcherradio.com, or on our Facebook page.